For scriptures today, we are going to start in Romans 12, but most of this morning is centered on the story of King Manasseh and the Old Testament of 2 Chronicles 33. We're going to talk about change, which is really not one of my favorite things to talk about. I almost said to preach about. It's really just not one of my favorite things to talk about because change, it represents the fact that I don't have control over things. And maybe you can relate to that. Change is inevitable, change is necessary, you can't stop it. So before I really go on, is there anybody here who just loves change? Come on, there are people that love it, okay. Who likes change, okay? Yeah. How many of you would say you hate change? It is not what you vote for, right? You don't like change, right? Okay. I don't mean literally voting. I'm just saying, so like, change is difficult. I will always remember the first year of marriage with Cassie 14 years ago, and I came home on a day that I was very tired. I'd worked hard, and I walked in, and the whole living room was different. Yeah, she didn't ask my opinion on it. The whole living room is different, and that meant that my routine was now off. That meant now when I walked in, I didn't turn this way, I had to turn this way. It meant when I wanted to look at the TV. So did you see how hard my life was 14 years ago? Thank you. Thank you for the fake sympathy, I'll take it. So what I will say is we worked out a deal where it was like, hey, please don't mess with my corner. This is where my chair is. This is where my books go. This is my view of the TV when we settle in as a couple. The rest of it, do what you want to. And most of the time it's okay, and on occasion, I don't know where things in the kitchen are, but you know what? We made an agreement and I'll stick to it. And isn't it funny how something so small can really throw you off? Have you ever had something similar happen where somebody's just changed something and you're like, this should not bother me as much as it does, but it bothers me a lot. That's how I typically am, and I'm a lot better than I used to be, but it is still not really my thing. I've got a couple great quotes on change that I want to share with y'all today from the great old prophet George Bernard Shaw. He said, progress is impossible without change, and those who cannot change their minds cannot change anything. And so the reality is that change really is something that you can't stop even if you want to, and you can't control it. In my personal life, parents, maybe you can relate to this. I would love to have a room where I could walk into that room and I could revisit the kids as newborns, or I could revisit them at 1-year-old or 5 years old or whatever. I don't want to actually go back in time and relive all of it. I'd love to visit it from time to time. I mean, can you relate to that? So that I really would love to do, but I find myself trapped between missing who they were and kind of just being fascinated with who they're becoming. I want to know who they're going to become, but I can't know that without change. And my kids, they're just 7 years old and right on the brink of 9, but I still miss the days that were. And change is just difficult no matter where you go. I started as lead pastor here in 2021 at the end of the year, and before that, there was Pastor Tom, who led this church from 1988 until then. He's doing great, by the way. He just turned 74 yesterday. Happy birthday, Pastor Tom. And he'll be here in September for a couple Sundays to share some messages with us, and I'm looking forward to that. But even before Pastor Tom, there were 5 families that helped set up the legacy of this church. And we're doing some research right now because I'll be honest with y'all, I think that the legacy of this church is coming up on somewhere around 50 years. I'd love to celebrate that. It's a big deal. But change is difficult. Change is difficult. I imagine it was difficult in 1988. I know that it's difficult in 2021. It's still difficult. I remember hearing stories about the time when this building, this church building right here, was being built. Because what we now know is the cafe over next door, that was the sanctuary for many, many years. And when I came and started attending here, I still saw the sound booth set up there. So if you ever walk in there and you're like, oh, that's weird, why are there electrical outlets right about here in the wall? That's because that's where the sound booth was. We needed them. But to illustrate that, how many people here attended church at some point over there when it was the sanctuary? Just put your hand up. Okay, we got a few of them here, right? And most of you have no idea, and I am one of you. But I remember hearing from Pastor Tom and from Pastor Marcia that some people who were very excited about the change, even in this building, didn't really make it across the driveway as this was built. And some of that is just because change is hard. It's very difficult. This is why a lot of times as you look throughout church history, and I'm not bad-mouthing other denominations, what I'm saying is this is why a lot of times you'll see denominations spring up because they really embrace this move of God and they're so excited about it. And then as he continues to move, they're like, but you're changing this. And we just grabbed a hold of this. So we don't want to move from this, so we'll create a movement out of this. But as Pastor Tom used to always say, and I've already said it once, the God who never changes everything that he touches. He has to. He's continually in the process of taking us into a place where we can return to the garden with him. And because of that, he has to restore things, but you can't change everything all at once. If you do, people freak out, and nobody knows that better than God. And so he has very systematically rolled out how we're going to be changing things. Before I stepped in as the lead pastor, I led Elevate Student Ministries. I was part of the leadership there for 12 years as the youth pastor, 12 years as a leader there. And that's a lot longer than I meant to do it. Whoops. But had a great time, loved it. And when I transitioned into this role, Pastor Ian transitioned from the kids minister into the youth pastor. In case you're trying to make him feel uncomfortable and look at him, you're just making his wife feel uncomfortable. He's up there, right? So you can make him feel uncomfortable up there. So Pastor Ian and Sarah and their son Owen are getting ready to move to Kansas City, Missouri. And next Sunday will be the last Sunday, and Pastor Ian's gonna be delivering a message 1 week from today. I hope that y'all will be here, not just for his message, but after the service is done, we're gonna go next door into the former sanctuary, current cafe, and we're going to have just a small reception where we can hang out. My brother, we're gonna have some chicken wings there, all right? Okay? And maybe spend some time with him. Bring him a card. Make sure you've got a story about how much you appreciate everything that he's done, because he's not just given us 3 years of a youth pastor. He's been a kids minister. He's worked here twice, and he's really given a lot, and so has his family. And so I hope that you'll join me next week as we honor him. Now, that being said, it is with great pleasure that I let you know that we have an addition coming up to the church staff as well. We have some of our deacons who are transitioning into a staff position. Jared and Beatrice Woody are going to be joining us on staff. Jared and Beatrice, would you stand up? Okay. So excited about this. I know Pastor Ian and Sarah, y'all are excited too. Couldn't be more excited. They have served with youth since I was in the youth group. We've seen them here as single adults. We've seen them get married. We've seen them operate as deacons. They have history. Currently, Jared is serving as a police officer in New Bern, and they're making the leap into a ministry lifestyle and career. So God bless you, Godspeed. But what they're gonna be doing is helping us oversee youth ministry, children's ministry, so all of kind of like adolescents, and helping us expand security at this church and Liberty Athletics, because some people like to play sports. Anybody like pickleball? I still don't really know what that is. Okay, so like pickleball. Softball, we don't need a league to do softball. We can do softball on our own if we want to, right? Bowling, things like that. We're gonna brainstorm, and we're gonna have a really great time as we step into this new era. And it's really great when you get to step out, but you know the person who's stepping in. It brings so much comfort, doesn't it? And so I'm very excited. They'll be joining us in August as staff members. And so as we move forward, we have to remember that God always changes things. And as much as we'd love to keep them the way that they are, we can't. I love Pastor Tom. We chatted briefly yesterday, and I'm looking forward to visiting with him soon. He was the same age I was when he became the lead pastor here at 38. And again, like I said, he just celebrated 74, and things change whether we like it or not. But I want you to know that God always pulls good out of it if you allow him. Because change is gonna happen, and you can either have forced change or you can have chosen change, and that's what we're gonna talk about today. Many of you know my life verse is Romans 12:2, which is to not be conformed to the pattern of this world, but instead be transformed by the renewing of your mind, because then you learn what God's will for your life is. It says that it's good and pleasing and perfect will for your life. When I read that verse and really let it sink in for the first time, it changed me, because I realized I'm not stuck as who I am. I realized I can change. And as simple as that sounds, I think most of us just cognizantly, we understand, yes, anybody can change and God can do anything, but I actually felt hope in the idea that I could change. It's not just the way that I've been is how I'm going to be, because I'm going to allow the Spirit to change me. And the reality is that lasting change happens when you encounter God in a genuine way. But I want to give that verse some context, and so we're going to actually read the first 8 verses of Romans 12. It says this. Paul says, "So dear brothers and sisters, I plead with you to give your bodies to God because of all he has done for you. Let them be a living and holy sacrifice, the kind that he will find acceptable." Which, first of all, is interesting to me because it tells me there are some sacrifices that we would give to him that he would not find acceptable. And that's worth thinking about. It says, "This is truly the way to worship him." And in the New Living Translation, it says, "Don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. And then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect." Because of the privilege and authority God has given me, I give each of you this warning: don't think you're better than you really are. Be honest in your evaluation of yourselves, measuring yourselves by the faith that God has given us. Just as our bodies have many parts, and each part has a special function, so it is with Christ's body. We are many parts of one body, and we all belong to each other. And then it says, in his grace, God has given us different gifts for doing certain things well. So if God has given you the ability to prophesy, speak out with as much faith as God has given you. If your gift is serving others, serve them well. If you are a teacher, teach well. If your gift is to encourage others, be encouraging. If it's giving, then give generously. And if God has given you leadership ability, take the responsibility seriously. And if you have a gift for showing kindness to others, do it gladly. Now, there's other places where it talks about the gifts that the Holy Spirit gives us, and the Holy Spirit gives gifts out as he wills it. And in Ephesians 4, not long ago, we talked about ways that we're gifted to build God's church. But in Romans 12, these are what we call motivational gifts. And it says that God the Father has given you these things. And do you know why he's given them to you? Because these are what motivate you. If you're a giver, you give. You look for ways to give. If you love serving people, you look for ways to serve. If you are gifted with encouragement, you are always going to be walking K-love for people, positive, encouraging. If you're a leader, you're going to go through life saying, man, I don't want to be in charge, and then getting frustrated at who's in charge, and then looking for an opportunity to be in charge. But if you let God do it, then you lead well and you take it seriously. These are things that motivate you through life, and it's important to know what motivates you. And it's equally as important to remember that just a few verses before that it said we all belong to each other. Why? Because when we work together, we are able to affect change. And when you work alone, you are not. How does the generous person exhibit generosity without somebody to receive? How do you encourage somebody if you stay in your hidey hole? How do you lead if you turn around and nobody's there? How do you do things alone? We belong to one another. And this is important because as you look through just these few verses, it says that we let God transform us by changing the way that we think. And if we don't let God transform us, it says that we will be conformed, that it says that we will copy the behavior and the customs of the world. So just by doing nothing, you're choosing something. By doing nothing, you're going to allow the world or your circumstances or society to shift and change you. We had an excellent time, men of God, yesterday. Had a men's meeting in the morning. It was a great conversation. One of the things I love, just to be honest with you, is I thought it was very evident that we did not all agree with each other on some of what we talked about. And I'm being very serious. I love that because here we are now talking about things that we normally would have just kept our mouth shut. It's not worth it. They don't agree. No, that's why it's worth it. So we could actually talk and we could actually help each other and push them and have them push us, which is the part that we often forget. Man, it was such a good time. And the reason that I bring that up is because it talks about changing the way that you think and how you'll learn God's will for your life. Part of how you learn God's will for your life is by interacting with other people because we all have the same Great Commission. And how do you do the Great Commission without interacting with people too? The promise is that you will not know God's will for you And what it really boiled down to, as we looked at it, was we said there's scriptural mandates, but then there's also things that culture kind of pushes on you. Okay, well, culturally, this is what we do here. Could be different than the culture in Guatemala or somewhere else. And then you have to find what that personal mandate is. Scripture, you have to follow what the Lord tells you through Scripture. But the reality is, as you get closer to God, you will also be able to follow what he tells you to do personally. And there are some things that he may convict you of and not allow you to do, but allow other people's to do, or vice versa. It's important to know him. It goes on to tell you what motivates you so that you will know how to interact with one another. And so we've got to rely on one another, and we've got to invest in one another, because change is constant. And if we refuse it, then we will receive forced change. Again, parents, I plead to you, have you ever enforced forced change with your children? This is your new bedtime. This is the new house rule. This is your new chore. This is called forced change, and we do it because they have not chosen the proper change. And as they grow, that's part of how we are to help them grow. And what is it that God calls himself? He's your father. And so sometimes if we don't choose the correct change, he says, okay, forced change it is. Now, what is forced change from God? Because he doesn't do this, zap, and then just shift everything about you. That's actually what we pray for. Hey, God, I don't want to struggle with this anymore. Could you just give me like a zap? And then I don't. No, he's like, no, but I will expose this. Oh, that's not what I asked for. I wanted you to change my heart. He said, no, you got to change your heart. I'll change your circumstances so that your heart could get tended to. So he is in the business of forced change when we are not already doing the work that we know that we need to. I was convicted by the Lord to pursue ministry as a vocation, and not everybody is, but I was a long, long time ago. I just didn't do it because what I was wrapped up in was fun, and I felt like I was good at it. So I did radio, and I did all these other things until God forced change, but I'll talk about that in just a little bit. Change is constant, and we see this a lot in the history of even God's favored nation, Israel. As it was established, you had the first king, King Saul. King Saul, I think in an oversimplification, we could say he whiffed it. Didn't do a great job. Then you got King David. He's a man after God's own heart. He never did anything that upset God. He did some big stuff that upset God, which is actually a little encouraging because I want to be conformed to the image. I want to go from glory to glory and be conformed to the image of his son. And I know I'm going to mess up. And I pray I find the same forgiveness that David did. And then he handed down the kingdom to his son, Solomon, who's known as the wisest man who ever lived. So because he's the wisest man who ever lived, he never made mistakes. Well, he made at least 1,000 of them. But, oh, I'm sorry, he made at least 999 of them. Is that better? Okay, that's what I meant. That's what I meant. Some of y'all are like, I don't understand the math joke. No, he had 1,000 women in his life that seems very foolish. He made some mistakes. If he's the wisest man who ever lived, and David had a heart after God's own heart, let me just tell you, you're gonna make a mistake or two also. Let it change you so that you don't have to repeat them. Because after Solomon came his son, King Rehoboam. And King Rehoboam, through a story that I don't have time to unpack for you today, split the kingdom of Israel. He didn't take good, godly counsel, and he decided he knew what was best. He took the kind of counsel that he wanted to hear, and he didn't allow the change that he needed to. And all of a sudden, it's split, and now you have the kingdom of Judah and the kingdom of Israel. Isn't it sad to think that as God established his own nation, it lasted through 2 kings before it split? We're divisive. We can't agree. We forget that we need each other. What horrible numbers. If that doesn't depress you, I'll just go ahead and give you numbers that depressed all of the men at the men's meeting yesterday. I read a study on Christians, and it said amongst the Christian men that were interviewed, it said 74% of them said, if I knew I could get away with it, I would choose to have an affair or a one-night stand. 74% of Christian men, if they knew that they'd get away with it. Now, I don't know where they did that. As far as I know, they weren't polling us, like here in Havelock. But I'm just saying, a lot of us, if we cave to sin nature, we're entertaining things that we have to allow to change us, which we'll also talk about in just a little bit. All right, go ahead and head on over to 2 Chronicles chapter 33. This is depressing to think that this is what Christians would choose. But it means that we need to make sure that we are doing something that will change. Here's another quote for you from Leo Tolstoy. He said, "Everyone thinks of changing the world, but no one thinks of changing himself." You know, we talked about this book that really has just kind of rocked my world. It's called Practicing the Way. And it says, be with Jesus, become like him, and then do as he did. And I really believe that by and large, we do the opposite. We try to do the things that he did so that we can become like him. And the more that we become like him, we think that we'll be like him. So we want to take part in these big initiatives. We want to do these grand things that make a huge difference physically that we can see in the lives of others. And we forget all the while that if you really do want to enact change in the world around you, it has to start with a changed heart and with a changed mindset and with a changed human. In 2 Chronicles chapter 33, we see a very tragic story. And we'll start right in verse 1 and we'll read most of the chapter. It says, Manasseh, here's your first issue. Manasseh was 12 years old when he became king. It's like a Disney movie, isn't it? And he reigned in Jerusalem 55 years. Verse number 2 about Manasseh. He did what was evil in the Lord's sight, following the detestable practices of the pagan nations that the Lord had driven from the land ahead of the Israelites. We're 2 verses in. Can we take a break? Let me just give you some other numbers. In Israel, there are 19 kings in their history, and every single one of them has some sort of word that says they did evil in the Lord's sight. Every single one of them. In the kingdom of Judah, you have 20 kings, and only 6 are mentioned as doing what is right. So out of 39 kings in nations dedicated to God, only 6 of them are remembered in God's book as ones who did what was right in his sight. Does this not paint the scene that this is difficult to do what pleases God unless you let him transform the way that you think? Verse 3, he rebuilt the pagan shrines that his father Hezekiah had broken down. That's so sad. He constructed altars for the images of Baal and set up Asherah poles. He also bowed before all the powers of the heavens and worshiped them. So he started worshiping creation. He built pagan altars in the temple of the Lord, the place where the Lord had said, my name will remain in Jerusalem forever. He built these altars for all the powers of the heavens in both courtyards of the Lord's temple. And Manasseh also sacrificed his own sons in the fire of the valley of Ben Hinnom. Human sacrifice from the king of God's people. It says he practiced sorcery, divination, and witchcraft, and he consulted with mediums and psychics. He did much that was evil in the Lord's sight, arousing his anger. Okay, why didn't he change and do what was right? And while we're thinking on this, why don't we change and do what we know is right? And it's the same answer. Because for a time, it appeared that there were no consequences for what he was doing. We talked about this not long ago. The sin that we pursue, the temptations that tempt us, they come from our own sinful desires. And so since they are there and it would appear in the short term that there is no consequence, we indulge them further. When we indulge them further, it leads us down a very, very dark road. Here are some reasons why change is often hard. People naturally assume the worst. Even those of us that are optimists, when somebody says they want to change, I don't know, the way that your living room is laid out. It's not gonna be good. The sun's gonna come right through that window. It's gonna block the TV. You're gonna hate it. You wait. You'll say I'm right. Who cares? Maybe we should watch a little less TV. Small things that come, we instantly start to say, well, this is gonna be bad. If you do that, you know what's gonna happen. This happens. And to be fair, every decision that you make is always a decision against something else. You ever see those movies or TV shows where person A has to choose between person B and person C? Well, when you choose person B, person C should go. or vice versa. That's how that works. But today people are finding ways around that too. We naturally assume the worst, but that's because we feel safer with what we know, even if what we know is not fulfilling. Another reason, scientifically, is because, as we hinted at earlier, the brain can only handle so much change at one time. Creating too much change too quickly can engage the brain's fear center and cause people to resist. I actually know a story of somebody who had their house painted, and when they were driving home one night, they didn't notice their house because it had just been changed. So they turned. It was just a little too late, and they parked in the ditch until the morning. So it's a real story. And honestly, sometimes when there is big change, we miss it because it's changed so drastically, so radically, that it no longer feels familiar. Number 3 out of 4 for you, old habits die hard. The longer that a habit or tradition has been practiced, the harder it is to change. And for those of us who have more years under our belt, the harder it is for us to accept it too. It's like a river that has run for a lot of years, and now there's deep grooves in the earth, and it takes a lot of time to try and change the direction of a river. And I would often say this too, because even if you're not averse to change in the beginning, normally adversity to change happens the closer that you get to the actual change. At first, it's like, man, that's a great vision, that's a great idea. And then once you get there, you do something big, you're like, oh man, maybe we'll get together one day, and now you have to make the decision. Now all of a sudden, it's bigger. You say, one day we're gonna build a house. And then as you get closer, you're like, oh, this is stressful. Every time you get closer to a big change, there is resistance that comes with it because it lacks the familiar. But God's not asking you to do what's familiar. He's asking you to do what he wants you to do. He didn't create you so that you could live in a comfortable life. He created you so you could live a life that changes the world, but it starts by changing ourselves. The negatives that happen in a church culture when things change, by the way, like more work, recruiting volunteers, having a longer day, these things start to become more and more ominous and harder to grab a hold of, and it's the same thing in our personal. So I mentioned I was gonna talk about this. When I felt called to ministry, I was like 14, 15 years old, and I was attending a Lutheran church at that time. And I was going to this church that was meeting in a community center down in Newport, doesn't exist anymore, but I remember bringing my friend, and I was so excited I got my friend to go to church with me, and they had that part. You ever been to a church service where they have a moment where you just turn around and you greet people, and you're saying, like, hey, peace be with you, peace be with you. And so that's what we were doing. My friend thought they were saying the force be with you. And so I found out that my friend was walking around shaking hands saying, may the force be with you. I guarantee you people thought he was making fun of them. He just had never really been to church. It's okay. I remember starting to feel called into ministry there, and so I sat down with my pastor, had this long talk, and then he gave me brochures, he gave me pamphlets, and he said, yeah, one of these seminaries will be good, good luck. It's the best he could do. So I looked at that and it seemed impossible, so I didn't do it. And because I didn't pursue change, forced change came to me. I fell into radio, and when I went to radio, I started pursuing things, and the surroundings that I had, the people that I spent time around, it changed me for the negative. Have you ever found yourself in a season of life where the people around you were pulling you down and you knew it? Now, here's a better question. Have you ever found yourself unwilling to change it even though you knew you were being pulled down? Because that's where I found myself. Well, this is really not what I'm supposed to do, but it is what I know. And what am I gonna do? Give up what I know and go take a gamble on something I don't know? God's like, yes, do that. The father of the faith is called Abraham, who left his home and pursued that which he did not know. He was sent to a land of people that were not his own. And through forced change, I found myself in a season of life where I got fired, where my relationship fell apart, my dog died, like all of it. It was a country song. I can laugh with you now, but I'm just telling you, like 25 years ago, not so much. Everything changed. And I found myself so depressed because my life didn't even look like my life anymore. I wasn't in my home. I wasn't with the person that I knew. I was now in my best friend's house in the side guest room with most of my stuff in boxes in my room and boxes in a storage unit. Didn't even have my dog there to comfort me. Everything was different, and I was miserable. And I'm telling you here, 25 years later, I'm so grateful for my misery. I also want to tell you that God did not cause my misery. I caused my misery, and this is how it works. Because again, if God wanted to change you with a zap, he could, but he's too good to do it. He will let you reap the own consequences of what we've done, and then in our misery, he'll say, now are you ready? And that's what he did for me, and I had to change. And if you can't relate, just know that you're wrong. You can relate. If you've ever been broken up with, if you've ever grieved a loss, if you've ever had to find a new job, if you've ever had to find new friends, this is where we let God win. Unfortunately, one of the reasons that we don't change is that we love the sin that we are in at the time. We don't want to change, but we need to. And in case nobody's ever told you this, because sin is not a popular word, sin is a terrible and destructive thing. Sin is anything that goes against God. There's a popular book out right now, and it says sin is anything that you commit against yourself. And that book is wrong. Sin is anything that you do against God. He's the one that created you. Sin is destructive because it feels good, and because it feels good, you want more of it. It's almost like a drug, isn't it? God doesn't promise to deliver you from all sin, but he does promise to be with you as you learn to overcome it. So God doesn't always respond in the same way to the same circumstances. He's sovereign, but he does give you a way that you can overcome it. And in 1 John chapter 3, a couple verses, in 1 John chapter 3, starting in verse 4, it says, everyone who sins is breaking God's law, for all sin is contrary to the law of God. Now, this is where sometimes we get into a debate and we're like, well, okay, and I won't say specifically a sin, but we'll start to debate, well, what in the case of this? Well, what if this happens? Well, what if that happens? Okay, you're splitting hairs over what if. We're talking about a general concept. We're talking about a principle that if you are committing something that is sin, it breaks your relationship with God. Most Christians should agree with this. And it says, you know that Jesus came to take away our sins because there's no sin in him. And anyone who continues to live in him will not sin. But anyone who keeps on sinning does not know him or understand who he is. This is a very convicting verse. And then John goes on to say, dear children, don't let anyone deceive you about this. I'm so glad that he wrote that. It says, when people do what is right, it shows that they're righteous, even as Christ is righteous. But when people keep on sinning, it shows that they belong to the devil, who has been sinning since the beginning. But the Son of God came to destroy the works of the devil. Those who have been born into God's family do not make a practice of sinning. That should encourage y'all, because you're going to screw up, you're going to make some mistakes, but we don't make a practice of it anymore. We're different, we have changed, okay? So we don't make a practice of sinning, because God's life is in us, is what it says. It says, so they can't keep on sinning because they're children of God. So now we can tell who are children of God and who are children of the devil. Ugh. Anyone who does not live righteously and does not love other believers does not belong to God. Okay? So can I encourage you today? Nothing that has ever happened in your life has surprised God. Not one thing. Not one sin that's been committed against you, not one sin you've committed, not one mistake you've made, not one evil thought that you've ever entertained for a second longer than you should have has surprised him, and he's still here. All you gotta do is reach out and grab a hold of him. That's it. He is still here. He's accessible to you. But you're gonna have to choose him over the sin that is enticing you. Because those that love God and those that have God living within them don't make a practice of it anymore. We actively choose against what our flesh wants. And there's a lot to be said about how we rely on one another for that help. We talked a lot about that in the men's meeting. But reach out for those who are around you and are willing to help. So, if God is allowed to change in your life, I would just tell you, let that change motivate you to draw closer to him and his word. All of the changes in my life in that season, 25 years ago, they were all my own fault. Almost all my own fault. It was my own sin. It was my own pride. It was my own decisions that I was chasing, and that's why I ended up where I was. Most of us end up there and we say, God, where are you? And he's like, I'm with you, and I don't want to be here either. And I had to allow him to change the things he wanted to change so that both of us were no longer in that situation. Did Manasseh know that he was sinning? Did he think it was okay? All of those things that he's doing, I can't imagine that he thought it was okay by the God of Israel, but my guess is that he had not experienced those consequences. Those consequences often encourage us to embrace something that I call chosen change. In chosen change, it's totally different. Viktor Frankl, he a very prolific author from World War II era, he wrote, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." I had this moment with my son a couple weeks ago where I went into the guest bathroom and I noticed that while the cabinet underneath the sink is mostly a dark brown, there is this very odd shape that is not dark brown. And I love my kids, but my son, he knows how to destroy things, right? Y'all seen Wreck-It Ralph? This is the prequel, okay? So I go up to him and I'm like, "Hey, are you picking the paint off of this cabinet?" And he's like, "No." I'm like, "Tim, I'm gonna give you a chance to tell me the truth. Are you picking the paint off of this? Because it's destroying it. It's making it look completely different." He's like, "No, Daddy, I've never done that." I said, "Tim, I'm just gonna give you one more chance. Because I know that you like to play rough with toys and sometimes you break things." And around this time, my daughter walked in the room and she was like, "Oh, Daddy, I do that all the time." Sorry, Tim. Emma, why are you physically tearing apart the furniture in the bathroom? She's like, "I just get bored when I'm sitting there." I'm like, "Okay, all right. Here's what we're gonna do. Now we got a family project." Now, we're laughing, but have you ever looked at your life and been like, "Man, why am I even doing this? I'm just bored. I'm just idle. I'm just picking away at something. It's not even looking the way it's supposed to anymore." So now we have a family project. And we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna have to renovate this cabinet. And I would just tell you that if you have chosen to allow God to change you, this is what it will look like. The first thing we're gonna have to do is sand that paint off. And the first thing you're gonna have to do is cast off the old. Yes, it's an old time word now, but cast it, throw it, chuck it, whatever you wanna call it. Get rid of the old. How can you ask God for something new while you're holding onto something old? I go to bed every night with a glass of water in case I get thirsty, because I do about once every other month. I get thirsty in the middle of the month, in the middle of the night, and drink water. But in the morning, I refuse to drink it because I'm worried that dust has fallen in it while I'm sleeping. Now, that being said, maybe you don't struggle with that. Y'all are like, "Man, Pastor Blake got some issues this morning." Have you ever left your coffee out the next day and forgotten that it was yesterday's coffee and reached out and taken a sip of it? Has anybody ever done that? Right? You don't take a second sip. You're ready for that sip of hot, fresh coffee. You're like, "Oh, that's yesterday's." Okay. You know what you don't do? You don't go to the coffee pot and say, "Whew, yesterday's coffee's cold. I'm gonna top that off." Especially if you have cream in it, because then you have that nice layer on top. Could you picture doing that? That's what we do. We say, "God, I need a fresh word. I need a fresh touch." And he's like, "Get rid of the old stuff." Well, the old stuff, it still has some value. I just want some new stuff. Cast off the old. God's desire is to cast your sin as far as the east is from the west. Our desire is to hold it right here, because then we still have control. So we're gonna have to get rid of that paint. We're gonna have to cast off the old. I wanna paint and redo it. That means I'm gonna have to clean it, sand it, and paint it. It feels like more than I want to do, but I also don't wanna look at that spot anymore. So it's worth thinking about, what old habits and bad attitudes do we need to remove from our lives so that God can replace them with new habits and new attitudes and fresh perspectives. And then you gotta be willing to let him remodel you. I don't know about your home, but in my home, it's not a democracy. I love that we live in a democracy outside of my house. But we're not gonna vote on the color of the cabinet, because one will vote for pink and one will vote for orange. But since it's not a Little Caesars, my wife will choose what color is going to be on the cabinet, all right? Okay. See, I got some wisdom, all right? And my kids are gonna have to be happy with the decision that was made by their parents. And if they're not, well, it's their bathroom. They're just gonna have to deal with it. You have to be willing to let God remodel it. You may say, well, God, this is not the way I wanted it to look. And he might look at you and say, cool, round two, you wanna try building it again? No, sir. Okay, well then this is how we're gonna rebuild it. So you gotta be willing to get rid of the old, and then you can't really complain about the new when it comes in. God, this is uncomfortable, this is new. Of course it is. Why wouldn't it be uncomfortable? It's new. And this one's probably the hardest. You have to delight in what he has done. You have to love that he's made you new. And eventually we do, but in the short term, it's hard because as he's making you new, what happens? Well, the old is getting further and further away, and the old might be friends. It might be habits. It might be places you used to go. It might be routines, and you still long for it, but you have to delight more in what is than what was. And I mean that, I'm using that word intentionally. Find delight in it. Find a deep, overwhelming joy and love and delight in what God has created in you. Because if you know it came from God, even if you're not ready for everything he's got for you, you know it's not bad. This is something that a lot of times us men, we struggle in. We pursue something and all of a sudden, now we've got a home, now we've got a family, and like everything has changed about our routine. And we have to delight in what God has created for us because we asked him to do it and he was good enough to answer us. But we'll hit a point that we don't even remember it anymore. And I promise you, that will be a good day. You'll hit a point that you don't even remember the way that you were if you continue to press forward. And that is such a good day. Have you ever had somebody come up to you and talk about something that happened? I won't say how long ago, but it's always back in the day. And you're like, I forgot we even did that. I forgot I even said that because it's so different than the man or the woman that God has created you to be now. Those are good days. Those are good days. And they used to depress me because what I would think about is, oh, I can't believe I said that. I can't believe I did that. And then what it became is, God, look how far we've walked. We're not there anymore. We're over here. I can't wait to see where we are 15 years from now. Let's jump back into 2 Chronicles, starting in verse 7 of chapter 33. Manasseh's got no consequences yet. It says Manasseh, he even took a carved idol he had made and set it up in God's temple, the very place where God had told David and his son Solomon, my name will be honored forever in this temple and in Jerusalem, the city I've chosen from among all the tribes of Israel. If the Israelites will be careful to obey my commands, all the laws, decrees, and regulations given through Moses, I will not send them into exile from this land that I set aside for your ancestors. But Manasseh led the people of Judah and Jerusalem to do even more evil than the pagan nations that the Lord had destroyed when the people of Israel entered the land. Is it not terrifying to you, because it is terrifying to me, that the people of God are capable of doing worse idolatry than the pagans that were there before the people of God arrived? So just because we call on the name of Christ doesn't mean we don't have something lurking within us. Listen to this in verse 10. The Lord spoke to Manasseh and his people, but they ignored all his warnings. This is where we find ourselves. Warnings aren't consequences, so we keep going. So the Lord sent the commanders of the Assyrian armies, and they took Manasseh prisoner. They put a ring through his nose, bound him in bronze chains, and led him away to Babylon. It's uncomfortable to know that God could sometimes use a foreign entity to punish people who will not cry out to him. But you see it over and over again in Scripture. In verse 12, it says, while in deep distress, Manasseh sought the Lord, his God. Now it's his God. And sincerely humbled himself before the God of his ancestors. And verse 13 says, when he prayed, the Lord listened to him and was moved by his request. So the Lord brought Manasseh back to Jerusalem and to his kingdom. And then Manasseh finally realized that the Lord alone is God. I'd love to tell you that's the end of the story. It's not quite. But isn't it something that somebody who could do all of these things, set up pagan shrines in the temple, set up pagan Asherah poles in the courts, somebody who sacrificed his children, could have a heart change deep enough that it says it moved God. when we are willing to change, when we choose to change because God wants us to, it moves God. So a lot of times we're like, I'm gonna sing my lungs out. I'm gonna sing until my throat gets sore. I'm gonna worship, I'm gonna serve. These things are awesome. But unless the heart changes, the things that we do on the outside don't move God. But this moved God. So when it moved God, let me ask you this. Sometimes we can't forgive ourselves or others. But you have to be willing to do that, because unforgiveness will bound it up too. And that's not the purpose of today's sermon, but you need to understand that we have to let go of pasts and mistakes that others have made and mistakes that we've made, because that's part of casting off the old. It doesn't mean you ignore it. It means that you deal with it and you make a hard decision that that is not who I will be anymore. I will not be the person who did that, and I will not be the person who holds this over that person. So are you willing to be one of God's remodeling projects today? Or will you wait until it's forced? I can guarantee that you won't regret it if you choose to allow the change. There was change, it scares people. Sometimes God's capable of things that we didn't even know were possible. There's an old story of a man from like the backwoods of Tennessee, and he goes to a big city and he's never even seen an elevator, doesn't even know what an elevator is. All he knows is he walks into the building, he's looking around and he sees this older woman walk into the elevator, and the door closes. He's staring at it and he's like, what's in there? And when the door opens again, there's like a 20-year-old woman who walks out. And in the story, he says, Billy, go get your mom. Silly illustration, I know that, but let me tell you this. A lot of times we're more concerned with changing somebody else than we are with changing ourselves. And in our prayers and our seeking to allow God to change us, I don't want this to get misinterpreted. You allow him to change you the way he wants to. And it's okay to pray that people will have a hard encounter with the Lord, but if you are praying, God, would you make this person do this? It is Christian witchcraft. And I know that because I've tried it. And what I found is God says, don't be a witch. So that's deep, isn't it? So when you are saying, God, make this person do this, it's okay to say, God, will you make this person more like you? But a lot of times we say, God, make this person do this, and that's not really our job. Our job is to become who God wants us to be, and that's generally my prayer for other people. Will you make them be the person you want them to be, even if I can't see it? That's what I do, because otherwise I still have my control issues. Give North Carolina a little shout out here. You know who's responsible for introducing the potato to England? Sir Walter Raleigh. How many of y'all knew that? Sir Walter Raleigh, because he's the one that brought it over there to England, but people were scared of the potato. Why? Because that is not normally where the things that they grew came from. And it was foreign and it was new. When I say they're scared about it, you can look this up. There were newspaper articles written against it. There were sermons preached on the evil of the potato. Aren't you glad some things change? Today we're talking about the devil's taters. Listen, change is scary. Change is sometimes forced, sometimes it's chosen. But most of us are grateful for potatoes, yes? All right, most of us. Listen, in 2 Chronicles 33:14, it says, after this, Manasseh rebuilt the outer wall of the city of David, from the west of the Gihon Spring to the Kidron Valley to the Fish Gate, and continuing around the hill of Ophel. He built the wall very high, and he stationed his military officers and all of the fortified towns of Judah. Manasseh also removed the foreign gods and the idol from the Lord's temple. He tore down the altars that he had built on the hill where the temple stood, and all the altars that were in Jerusalem, and he dumped them outside the city. And then he restored the altar of the Lord, and he sacrificed peace offerings and thanksgiving offerings on it. He also encouraged the people of Judah to worship the Lord, the God of Israel. This is amazing, isn't it? It's a complete 180. Verse 17, however, people still sacrificed at the pagan shrines, though only to the Lord their God. Remember what we were talking about in Romans 12? There are some sacrifices he does not find acceptable. And so this is the sad part of the story. I want to give you a brief overview and remind you of the law of the harvest. When it comes to seed time and harvest, you're always free to plant what you want. You can plant any seed that you want, but you're not free to choose what grows from the seeds. It will be what you plant. It always takes longer to grow, which is why sometimes we feel like the consequences haven't come yet, and you always harvest more than you planted. And the reason I share that is because even with this dramatic and genuine heart change, it says that it moved God. I'm going to read to you 3 scriptures about Manasseh that happened after this. 2 Kings 23, 26, and 27 says this: "Even so, the Lord was angry with Judah because of all the wicked things Manasseh had done to provoke him. For the Lord said, I will also banish Judah from my presence, just as I have banished Israel. And I will reject my chosen city of Jerusalem and the temple where my name was to be honored." In the very next chapter of 2 Kings 24, it says in the 3rd verse, "These disasters happened to Judah because of the Lord's command. He had decided to banish Judah from his presence because of the many sins of Manasseh, who had filled Jerusalem with innocent blood, and the Lord would not forgive this." And in Jeremiah 15, verse 4, it says, "Because of the wicked things that Manasseh, son of Hezekiah, king of Judah, did in Jerusalem, I will make my people an object of horror to the kingdoms of the earth." Well, why do I share that with you? I share it with you because if you don't understand that sometimes we still have to outlive the consequences, you'll lose heart. Sometimes it just takes time and you have to outlive it. You have to outlive the reputation, the consequences, and you have to take a look at the way that your sin has affected other people. Manasseh wasn't thinking it was going to affect other people, but sin is way more social than you are. And there are always people watching you, and there's always people picking up what you're doing, and there's always people justifying things based off of what they see you do. And so it's important that you remember that sin will always find its way to other people. It's not something you keep in your pocket. However, in James chapter 1, this is the final scripture of the day, it says, "God blesses those who patiently endure testing and temptation. Afterward, they receive the crown of life that God has promised to those who love him. And remember, when you're being tempted, do not say, 'God is tempting me.' God is never tempted to do wrong, and he never tempts anyone else. Temptation comes from our own desires, which entice us and drag us away." And this is the verse to remember. "These desires give birth to sinful actions, and when sin is allowed to grow, it gives birth to death." But he says in verse 17, he says, "Whatever is good and perfect is a gift coming down to us from God our Father, who created all the lights in the heavens. He never changes or casts a shifting shadow. And he chose to give birth to us by giving us his true word, and we, out of all creation, became his prized possession." Do you understand how magnificent that is? That the biggest gift that he gives you as you walk out your Christian faith is this light. He's the Father of lights. And what does light do but chase away the dark? And when the dark gets chased away, sometimes you're left with seeing what was hidden in the dark, and then your job is to uproot it and remove it. Maybe you didn't know it was there. Got it. But once God puts his light on it, now you do. And now the question is, what will you do about it? Are you content to just be saved and know that you're going to go to heaven probably someday? Or do you really want to be changed into somebody brand new? Pastor Ian, I'm going to end this with all my quotes with a quote in your honor from C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis said, "It may be hard for an egg to turn into a bird. It would be a jolly sight harder for it to learn to fly while it remained in an egg." We like eggs at present, and you cannot go on indefinitely being just an ordinary, decent egg. We must be hatched or go bad. A lot of times we are where we are and we want what God has for us. We just don't want the transformation. My challenge to you today is to let God transform you by changing the way that you think. If you change the way that you think, you'll change what you speak. And if you can change what you speak, you'll change what you do.